Welcome, Rebels. In this episode,
How empowering that is if a child knows to simply breathe. I'm always going back to, I guess one thing I rebel against is that the answers are outside of you or the answers are in this toy. No, the answer is in you. You breathe. You got everything that it takes.
you're listening to the Red Couch Rebels, a safe, comfy space for vulnerability and self-growth. I'm Jenny.
And I'm Erin.
We are seekers and self-advocates.
Yeah, we're not your doctors.
Or your therapists.
No, we're just fellow seekers on our own journeys of self-discovery.
Explore your inner rebel with us.
Let's sink in.
We are back with Mary Costello. Mary is, we've just enjoyed so much from part one, diving into everything brain related, nervous system, and there's so much more. So where do we want to start?
I don't know, because everything you're bringing up could be a 2-hour conversation itself.
Oh
I
my
could
gosh.
go just about
I just
every
love speaking
direction.
with people about this stuff. Not just because I think it's interesting. I think it's actually life enhancing,
Absolutely.
right?
Well, one of the things, Mary, I've enjoyed so much, obviously about this, the conversations we've had here, but with our time on your couch together drinking tea and even
Mhm.
our text back and forth.
Right.
You know, I think at one point I sent you how I was feeling and you sent a message back like something like, I just thank you for helping me feel more human, or just feeling okay with being, you know, how I am and who I am. And it's just, I think we can see each other and feel whatever the hell normal is, you know.
Right.
That's the life enhancing.
Well, and what I think, there's a lot of great new research about the importance of co-regulation.
Yeah.
And how when you're not regulated, or, you know, we have those little crazy makers going on in our head, maybe instead of downing a bottle of wine, you show up to somebody and say, oh my gosh, I got to tell you this. This is heavy on my heart or heavy in my head. And then you can co-regulate. Just like, I mean, it's just like tuning forks, right?
Right.
I think
Is that where you were going with the community in the classroom? We ended the last one and you said that some teachers are building community. Is that related to this co-regulation?
I think, well, yes, I would think it. And I don't think just some teachers, but most teachers have seen the need to create that community so that there can be a regulated community, a learning environment, so that learning can take place. And that's gotten to be more and more challenging, where the needs are greater. Again, going back to what Dr. Rachel Hack said about, we have got all these kids coming in that have a Gutenberg press nervous system, but they're living in an iPhone world. So they are jacked up. So they're not going to be able to learn. I remember, I don't know when, video games, explosions, but I remember seeing a student like sitting there and just moving his hands really fast. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is he having a seizure? What is that? And he wasn't. He was playing video games, right? It had kind of imprinted on him so much that muscle memory just was in his system. And I thought, oh, I didn't even know what that was. But so we see that. Think about these little children who are being, I believe, assaulted by the pixels and the screens and the bombardment that they're not ready for.
Do you think that the video game controller there, was that his nervous system regulating itself, because my gut, that's where my gut went, is maybe he
Wonder.
was stressed about something, and that action in his hands could bring him to a space where he felt like he was in control.
I never thought about that. That very well could be.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, one of the things that popped up as I was thinking about all of the wonderful things we shared in part 1 was this idea of neurodivergence. And I'm curious what you would share about that and how that overlays the idea of nervous system and just how our brains are wired, right? Because I've noticed too, just in my self-reflection over the last couple years, you know, I believe we're all on a spectrum. There really is no normal brain, right? As you've
No.
shared as well. And I've definitely explored being more neurodivergent, whatever that means to, you know, everybody here. But like, I feel like I do need that fidgeting aspect depending on what I'm doing. And so I started like buying some of the fidget tools to play with if I'm on a Zoom and I'm maybe in a more observant role, right? So it's just been interesting. It's interesting to think about what we observe and then what is happening within the body, within the mind.
So
And
can I
yeah,
ask you about your fidget toy, well, fidget whatever, that
yeah,
tool?
yeah.
Do you feel like it brought you to regulation?
For me, it's energy in my
Mm.
body, and I guess I haven't looked at it from the lens of regulation or not, because I feel like, you know, you could maybe be on that edge of more sympathetic, so more activated, and it's that energy in the body that I just need something to do with so that I can, I guess, so I can bring myself down into more of a focused.
Okay.
And for me, it's not fun because I don't want to be playing with a hair or flicking with a
Right.
pen, right? And so it's just, and I don't do it all the time. I think it depends where I'm at that day. And sometimes I need it, sometimes I don't, because, you know, I can swing all over the place. We've talked about on the podcast, I do swing probably more parasympathetic, where I go, you know, my, what do they call that? I go down, I go more into shutdown. But those are, you know, it depends on the week, I suppose, but it's more of the slowing down. But I do go into more anxious energy as well. So yeah, I think that those tools that I have by my desk, it's moving energy. And so that idea of the kid with the controller, I think there's that energy in the body, and it could potentially bring them back into that comfortable, regulated state.
Curious about that because, you know, there was a big boom of fidgets, spinners, and all of those things. And in the classroom, my lived experience was it was a fix that failed for most kids. It became a toy, not a tool.
A distraction, probably.
And then, you know, kids are, oh, I want that too. And it actually, I did not see that it really helped to organically change them or bring them into a regulated state with ready to learn. It just propelled, it just kept it going.
Sure.
So that was what I noticed. I'm always looking for ways to, like, I want the answer to be in us, with us. And like the breath is the way. The breath is the way to balance that. So just thinking about teaching children how to breathe. And I think that's really important. I remember a student, you know, we had those, I couldn't stand them, those timed math tests.
Oh, I loved those.
See? People loved them, or they
And some
hated
people hated them.
Like
My husband hated them, so we got both represented in this house.
Right. And for some, you know, it's kind of like, who did you speak to? They said they love boundaries. And you're like,
yeah, Caitlin,
you're
totally
good at it, right? And So, we always had to do them. And I remember this one boy, he like would just get almost hyperventilating before because he was so nervous about it. And one student went over and just tapped him on the shoulder. And she's like, hey, now's a really good time to start practicing your breathing. We don't want your cortisol levels to go up.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
that's so
That's
great.
they're great.
Wow.
And how empowering that is if a child knows to simply breathe. I'm always going back to, I guess one thing I rebel against is that the answers are outside of you or
Yeah.
the answers are in this. No, the answer is in you. You breathe. You got everything that it takes.
I mean, I think you make a good point because I used the fidget toys tools for a while when I was on some pretty long calls and meetings. And I think now I try to schedule my days, depends on the day, a little bit differently, where I'm not back to back to back to back, right? Where I can take that time to go outside and get some fresh air and
Right.
breathe, right? And sit in the grass or, do something where it's just stepping away from my screen. So I think just knowing what breaks or what tools that you can do, whether it is breath work, which I know I need to do more of as well.
Well, but then we go back to that little word with a big meaning, and,
Yeah.
right? So I totally get it. If you're and you're an adult too, right, Jenny? It's like you're
Yes,
not
most days I
developed-
feel like that.
Yeah.
I don't know what I want to be when I grow up sometimes, but
know.
yeah, I'm an adult.
Right. So, your brain's different as well. So for some people, it might not work. And it's probably a really good thing if you're on some long phone call where you can't just, oh, excuse me, I'm going to do some alternate nostril breathing for a minute. Right?
Mute myself.
Yeah. So it's all what works, what doesn't work, your lived experience.
Play with it a bit. Yeah, absolutely.
What other tools do you teach for regulation in the classroom? I think that they thought, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what I'm thinking here. I think they thought fidget tools or toys were going to be effective because they were small.
Yeah.
But when I'm doing intuitive movement to regulate, my body craves gross motor movement. Like
Yes.
whole body dancing or stomping or, so I'm wondering that would be interesting to do some research on that, to watch how the nervous system regulates with fine motor skills like that versus gross motor skills.
Well, you are very smart, Erin, because there's been a lot of research about that.
Oh, good. Glad it's already done.
Yes. According to Erin, your research dovetails with what they have found, especially with boys, right? I mean, not to be sexist or whatever, but school can be really hard for boys and girls who need to move, and everybody needs to move. So in New Zealand, I believe it's a law. Like if there's an hour of instruction, 15 minutes of it has to be movement. Movement is huge. I would not let my kids sit for longer than 15 minutes. It's like learn, break, learn, break, learn, break. The brain doesn't have the capacity to just sit there and keep, sit and get. So some options that I've done and I offer as options, we had peacock feathers that we would balance like on our hands. People would just walk by and it's like, well, what's crazy Costello doing today? It wasn't like, it might have looked like a circus at times, but it was all, I had a method to my madness. We would do the peacock feathers and it had to be silent because some kids need silence for regulation, but it's also really good to help children develop executive function. Being able to, you can control your voice, for 2 minutes, right? A lot of crossing the midline. I developed something I called brain chi. So crossing the midline is huge. And even in 3rd grade, I had some students who had not crossed midline. So that shows up as illegible handwriting. That shows up as a problem in their gait. It shows up in learning problems. So we would do that. There's always lots of music. And you are so right, Erin. You gotta dance. The dance parties, or just there's a whole if you ever really want to get into it, there's a whole system. It's called brain gym. All different ways of incorporating movement into the classroom, out of the classroom. Other studies showing what happens when we add minutes to recess, because during this whole psychometric stuff with testing and everything, a lot of recesses were minimized or even taken away. And then they started to notice behavior problems, and it did not help scores. And so then some schools started adding more, and that had a huge benefit. We gotta move to get that stuff out. And I was listening to a previous podcast, and Erin, you were talking about how you've witnessed like these releases when you're working on people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And like, tell me, why do you think that is, that when you're working on the body that there's that release?
Oh, that's a huge question. I don't think it always releases. Let me start by saying that. When doing energy work with somebody who is open to and ready to feel, there's the potential that when you're working in the body, those stored memories can surface. And if they're capable of refeeling, rehealing, releasing, then they can release, right? That's not something that I believe that I, as an energy worker, can do. I believe that is happening within the client, maybe between them and their higher self. And I'm going to use the word just, not trying to minimize, but I'm trying to put in perspective that I'm just facilitating. So I'm holding the space for the potential of it, but I can't make anything happen.
So would you say the body is what's happening? It's making it happen?
Not just the body. It does feel like it's more than just the body.
Okay.
Because people also have resistance to feeling what is in the body, right? So there are mental blocks to that. There are spiritual blocks to that. And like we were saying before with these students, each person on my table is unique, right? And they come with their own story and their own baggage, and what are they capable of seeing today? What are they capable of feeling today? What are they capable of releasing today? It's just meeting them where they're at.
Because it aligns with what I've learned just becoming a yoga instructor, and what I would also see years ago in the classroom. Like, our issues are in our tissues. You've heard that saying before, probably. So it is important to move and get those things out. And I think for kids experiencing school and, you know, the levels of shame you've talked about, or not fitting in, there's myriad reasons. They need to get out and move that, get that out. So you're 100% right. Movement is huge.
What's that? That's part of we're just playing with a rough outline right now. I'm not announcing anything. We're playing with an idea. Okay, Jenny, relax.
No,
Okay.
I put it out on my personal Facebook page.
Oh, did
there's
you?
some exciting stuff coming,
Okay,
so
great.
Not official announcement.
I'm the quick start, so I just had to preface that. But we were looking at running a retreat this winter for the Rebel Rewilding, honoring midlife sacred rage. And isn't that juicy? Yes.
So good. I love
Yeah, and as I was opening myself and feeling into that, I knew that music was necessary. I knew that movement was necessary. I knew that stillness was necessary for wherever people need to go to feel that. Because each, like you said, some of those students needed silence. Some people need silence to feel it. Some people need to move to feel it, right? So, as I
Yeah.
was, when you're talking about these things, that's all it keeps popping back in my head as I imagine and feel forward into this retreat, what the potential is, and it will lie in each person individually where they can go with that in that moment but to be held in a unified field in a community of people committed for the same purpose. It feels like there's maybe more potential than you could on your own, or I don't know.
Right. Well, just that, again, going back to that co-regulating or that collective
Yeah.
presence
Yeah.
And
is
permission, like that feels so important. That, like, the word permission takes away shame for me. Like that we
right.
have permission to feel what we're feeling. Like, because I think that's so why it's built to the point it is, because haven't given ourselves permission to feel it for so long. But how
Right.
freeing to then just finally be able to feel it. And I'm not saying it's all going to be gone in one weekend. Like, I'm
Mm,
not, but to have the experience so that you can have permission, you can go through it and make it to the other side and you're okay. You're okay, right? And probably
exactly.
more regulated than before because you're not carrying that chronic rage load in your nervous system.
And more connected to some, just the individuals and powerful support around you.
Yes.
Speaking to the loneliness stuff we were talking about in part 1. Absolutely. There's
Right.
power coming together in that way.
Well,
Mhm.
exactly. And I think that, just knowing that, because sometimes we get in our own head and it's like, I must be the only one who, fill in the blank. And then somebody says, you know what? I can't stand this about myself. And it's like, oh my gosh, me too. But like, I know you're a good person, but oh, you've got that going on too. Right. So, I mean, I've experienced that a lot with you, Jenny, when we've had our tea
Yep.
time where it's like, oh my gosh, kind of like, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. Like,
And it's not in a one-upping way. It's just like, oh my God, I'm not alone. Right? Yeah.
yes, like, oh, I feel less crazy. I love these two words too. Like, I have a friend, she always says to me when I'm talking or whatever, she's like, of course. Of course. And it's so gentle. Like, it's not like book up. It's just like, of course. Just a gentle allowing. And I love the word allowing
Yeah.
because in there you've got the word all and you've got the word ow. So what if you showed somebody all of your ows and then they show you theirs? It's like, oh, that connection, which is the antithesis, I think, of what we see on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, right? That's like that's not allowing, that's just promenading or whatever. That's an old word. But I've been watching a little bit of PBS. Actually, that was from Bridgerton. Promenading, I think they would do. But just to allow that. And I think those messages start, as both of you have talked about, in elementary school. But like that shaming. Like you should know your math facts, or you should know how to tell time. Yeah, well, what if you don't?
Right. Or
Right?
spelling's
Yes.
I had brought this up on, I think, Caitlin's, that Bodhi was homeschooled for kindergarten. So when he went into first grade, I didn't really I wasn't super focused on like reading and spelling in kindergarten. I was just focused on, what are you excited to learn about today, buddy? And let's follow it. So we got to multiplication and division because that's where his brain was loving it. So he gets to first grade, and his first spelling test, he doesn't know how to spell anything. And he just broke down in tears, like just panicking over this and feeling such shame. And the sweetest girl next to him was just so encouraging him. Not she didn't have the language that your students did, but she was regulating him. She was telling him it's going to be okay. This is the first week of class. Like how aware does this child have to be to even notice that he's upset, right? But then to reach
Right.
out and be connected, oh, it was very she will always have a place in my heart. I know her name. I will never forget it because
Yeah.
she was there for my son, you know? Oh, yeah,
And
but that's
that,
beautiful.
that's what matters, right?
Mm.
That's
And he
the
was in
community.
first grade, you're saying?
That was when he was in first grade, yeah. But we have these expectations that kids are supposed to be at a certain place at a certain time. And like that is just not true in the way that, and let's not even talk about kids. Let's talk about humanity in general. I saw a post this morning that said something about just because someone's further along on their timeline doesn't mean you're behind. And
Mm.
my brain was like, we're not on the same timelines. Just because they're in a different part of their time doesn't, there's no comparison, right? We're all learning different things. And I'm sure that's difficult to handle when you're a teacher and you have a curriculum to teach and you have
Word.
tests that you have to like meet certain scores, right? How do you balance that as a teacher?
That's a tricky dance, I think. But also knowing what are your beliefs, right? So I
Mm.
had an odd situation where I taught first grade, second grade, and third grade like consecutively. So 1 year, first, second, third. And I had similar students so I had some kids 3 years in a row because I had a split and what have you. And just the angst that some of those expectations cause the kids and the parents, right? Everybody should be reading. Everybody should be reading right now. And that was a belief, right? Or an expectation. Well, who created that? And it was the mother of a boy, and she was good friends with the mother of a girl so they're in the same class. And she was picking up the language quickly and she was reading. And then I had both of them again in second grade. And he was still kind of hobbling along and she's reading voraciously. And by third grade, he figured it out. She leveled off. And I remember finding some research that said that as well, especially in those first three years, first, second, third. Well, now we've got kindergarten, pre-K, now we've got 4K, 3K, whatever. Everybody kind of levels off around third or fourth grade. So quit the panic. Also, I think it's New Zealand. They used to, I don't know if they still do it, but they would have, for example, 6-year-old girls in a class with like 7-year-old boys. Because brain development wise, the Broca area and the other areas of the brain that deal with decoding and comprehension, they develop a bit slower in boys. Good. So they also didn't have a ton of learning disabilities because they didn't introduce formal reading until third or fourth grade. Just had a rich environment and just read and enjoy. So there's something to be learned about that as well.
We have so many different ways that we can evolve in our education. I love listening to the research and that people are trialing these things.
Mm-hmm. Trialing all these things that you already know, Erin.
If only I could just start my own school and hire amazing teachers that you've trained. Yeah, yeah, it's good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to return to the word allowing.
Mm-hmm.
This is semi-related. Recently moved one of my twins down to Yuma, and I was like, you know what? I should write an article on raising a rebel for the rebellion. So, knowing that I wanted to write something, I was doing a lot of reflection on top of what I normally would do in this situation, and I'm naturally reflective. So, it really opened like these boxes in me that I was able to revisit, and I think it's something that I don't think all parents take time to do when their children leave the nest. She's lived out on her own for a couple of years, but this felt a little different, right? And I took time to go back and revisit our journey together and celebrate. And I had a great conversation with her and grieve, just process the whole relationship, and so I revisited it with my mother because we never did that. And I wanted her perspective on what was it like to raise a rebel. Jolene actually drew this to my attention. She said to my mom when she met her, she's like, "Oh, well, you raised this rebel. My goodness, So I asked her, I said, what do you feel that you did to like encourage these things in me, these traits in me? I'm very proud of them. And she goes, I didn't do anything. I allowed you to be who you already were. I was like,
Oh,
wow. That's an amazing parent. Like, and it's such a quiet way to raise a child, right? Like such a quiet way. And I haven't written the article because I feel like it's still like expanding inside of me of what it means to raise a rebel, but allowing, I know it has done wonders for me.
And so this is your mom said that.
Yeah.
How do you think, like, what allowed her to allow? Like,
she said that it was the way she was raised. And yeah, it's interesting because you each, like she has, I don't know, I'm terrible with numbers, 6, 7 kids in her family. I'm terrible. My sister would know this. She'd have all their birthdays and everything. I have a lot of aunts and uncles.
Yeah.
And then they all branched off and married someone else and had kids, right? This is the story. So my mom brings in her allowing, and my dad brings in his upbringing too. So what is actually transferred to the child that comes from them, or the children that come from them? And it's unique in each one of the children. Again, like as I'm exploring this, it's almost hard to wrap my head around, and maybe I don't need to. It's not an assignment from anyone but me to write this article. But yeah. Oh, she said it was her mom.
Well, there's definitely, you could also do the opposite, like how to not raise, like, I think there's a lot of examples out there how to raise a compliant, good girl.
Oh,
right?
yes.
I mean, they're very nuanced. They're kind of like they say baked into the cake with a lot of things. So I think that would be a really great article to kind of give a voice to, well, here's another way.
And it's
Right.
different for each. Like when I was raising my daughters, I adopted them and they came to me with a foundation of trauma. So my task as their parent was to help them regulate and cope in the world, right? So as I've been balancing this, as my mom gave me the gift of allowing, but as I stepped into motherhood, I couldn't just allow them to be who they were as they entered, because they were entering with trauma. Right? And that you don't get by in society by letting trauma go unresolved or
Right.
You got to find coping skills. You got to find, so like, I'm kind of sad for them that they didn't get that experience of me when they were young. I'm hoping that they are getting that experience of me now that they're adults. But it's different for, even if I hadn't adopted my daughters, I'm sure it would be different for any of my, if I had more than one biological child.
Mhm.
I don't know, give me 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. But then also, here's the flip side to that. Have to allow yourself to be okay with the mom you were when you were that age. Like that's a gift too.
Mm.
Allowing yourself to be okay with that, like removing that shame. I think it's a valuable lesson to show our children imperfection, right? I think it takes some weight off of their shoulders. Like, all right, well, I know this really great lady and she's not perfect and she's my mom and she can sometimes not be perfect, but she's still a great person and she loves me. So I guess then I can do that same thing.
Yeah, and they don't judge me as harshly as I judge myself when I want to because I've obviously grown and learned over. I feel like I'm having a therapy section now. I'm sorry. Um, I feel I've obviously grown and learned as my children have. They've grown up with me, right? So I'm
Mhm.
obviously a better mother now than I was then. So when I try to go back and like, hey, I'm reflecting on how this happened, and I'm really sorry. Like genuinely
Mhm.
wanted to apologize, and they always like shrug it off. It makes them uncomfortable for me to say that I wasn't perfect for them at the time that we were together. Like,
Mhm.
not, they didn't need me to be perfect. They're just, I was there with them in it, so they
Right.
don't like it when I go back and then put shame on it, right? But there's
Mhm.
something to owning up to, you deserved to have me know this, and I didn't. Like, I wish I knew that, because you deserved that same type of support that I can now give your brother. That
Mm.
makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Send me your invoice. I'm gonna have a stack of invoices by the end of the month.
No, it's all
Uh,
connection. That's all.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and I hope that the listeners can, if they're reflecting on these things, I hope that they can find some of that validation if they're questioning these things, or to open up that conversation with their adult children to process things, because so often those things go unsaid. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, the story is written, the story is done. Let's not revisit that.
Right.
But
We have
there
a
is an
belief, we have a story,
yep,
put a
yep.
punctuation mark there and move
Mhm.
on.
Book is bound, can't change
Yep.
anything, right?
Right.
But there is so much potential for, if there are wounds back there, and you can take accountability for something,
Mm.
if you did have something to take accountability for, I think that can free something in them.
It teaches them too. It gives them permission. Like, I mean, like Mary said, it's okay to show up imperfect, and it's okay to have that have those conversations that acknowledge hurt or regret, and bring light to it.
Mhm.
Right. Because
Yeah.
I think that's important because it is illuminating of truth and conversations and the imperfectibility of everything, which I feel like we have to start rebelling against social media, not all of it, right? But how it might be interpreted when everything's just all shiny and glitzy and perfect. Like, oh, that is burdensome, I think. And no wonder a lot of people are having problems with that. So the anecdote would be a conversation.
Yeah.
It's interesting because we have the Rebellion Network, and we have people that are joining, and the sense of community is slowly growing. And some of the feedback I got was like, the content is so deep.
Yes.
Right? So there's a post, and what was one of them? One of them was on obedience. Jenny was like, I heard the word obedience the other day, and
You triggered me. Yeah.
yeah, so let's explore the word obedience. And it's like, how much time does it take to read everybody's thoughts on obedience and then feel it for yourself, and then do a long, like, these conversations tend to get longer on a sharing of
Right.
like, what is my reflection of obedience? And I'm curious, how much time does that take? Because I don't track it for
Yep.
sure. But how much time are we spending on social just scrolling passively, right? So if you
Mhm.
added all that up in a week and instead put it into just to sitting with obedience for a week, and then you have time to like actually sink into something that could transform you in an unexpected way.
Right. I think that's a habit we have to form, right? Because we've got the other habit of scrolling. And I can find myself doing that too, where life sometimes gets really hard. And it's like, okay, I don't want to think about what's happening with my aging parents. I'm going to go Wordle away some time, right?
Mhm.
I was reading too, when we were talking about information basically sabotaging our attention, that now every day there was a study done where scientists recorded, I think, the amount of data that people were taking in, and it's like 74 gigabytes of information a day.
Holy cow.
Now, what
Wow.
if, like you said, Erin, what if we spent and had that time maybe feeling 74 minutes of what's going on inside of your world, in your gut, in your head, in your mind, or in your relationships? I know that sounds just, I don't know, impossible or a little woo woo, but the long term benefits are going to be great.
Well, maybe it's the effort. Like, I scroll too. Like, I don't want to
Mhm.
pretend like I don't do these things as well. But there's more effort that goes into spending that 74 minutes of self-reflection, or having a courageous conversation, or not journaling to write down facts, but journaling to get to the feelings, right? Like that
Mhm.
we have limited energy in the day. So I love that you brought this point up of 74 minutes to feel inside, because that's more important than the obedience conversation on the Rebellion Network. That's more, like, that's what we've been trying to say, is like that relationship with self needs to move to the forefront.
Right. I worry sometimes about, like, even that obedience thing, like, oh my gosh, I can feel my shoulders like tighten up. And are we re traumatizing with some sharing? Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, right? Where, oh, that's going to dysregulate me. And then, oh my God, oh my God. So I don't know what that balance is. I don't want to ignore that, but how much time do we spend there, like what you said, or do we talk about a higher energetic topic,
Oh,
right? Because again, that's that co-regulation, co-dysregulation happens too. And we've all been in situations like that, I'm sure, where you're okay and then all of a sudden you're around somebody and they're dysregulated, and then your tuning fork responds to their vibes, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I love that idea of higher vibrational topics being woven in,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd be curious to kind of check in with individuals, whether it be on social media or with the network, to say, when we're exploring these, like, does it push you into an activated state or shutdown state? When I'm exploring, like, it was after the fact where I felt this and it was a minor like trigger where it was like, ooh, that rubbed me the wrong way when I heard that word, right? And then I came back and I was just looking at it from a few different angles. And when I posted it, I've always found that talking about the things that I'm reflecting a lot around, hearing other people's perspectives, helps me look at my beliefs and expand them.
Mm-hmm.
And like some of them apply, some of them don't. But it's always a really great way for me to look at it and say, okay, does this fit? Does it? So it's a way to me search while I connect in community.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, it's too much focus on the triggers and the wounds and the heavy stuff. Not everybody wants to go there all the time either.
It's probably not healthy to be there all the time.
Well, and I think too, it depends on the energy with which it is brought forth.
Yeah.
Is it brought forth as like, hey, I got to tell you, like a victim mentality, or more of like, I thought this was interesting, right? So there's different levels.
That's what I was thinking. It's a curiosity. It's like a curious
Yes.
exploration for me. And I liked hearing the different stories that people had around the word obedience and how that shows up for them. And it kind of expanded my perception of the word obedience, which can soften my reaction to it, right?
Yeah, I love that's to me the secret sauce of conversations, because it opens up like a window of, oh, there's another way to think about that.
Right.
And there could be a danger of, I think we need to balance it, but there could be a danger of the bordering on toxic positivity.
Yes.
That's definitely, we want to be a real raw community. Like when we host Circle here, I always say, I don't give a fuck what's in your cup. Like, and that means I don't care if you're drinking coffee, kombucha, water, or margarita. I don't care, and that is the vibe and the relatable space that we're trying to hold for people. And that, you said you had the years where it was smoking and drinking to numb out, right? But you needed community at that time too. Right. So I'm always very hesitant. I will say, not a little hesitant, very hesitant to create a space that feels judgmental in any way or leans only into the positivity, because in reality, life can be very painful.
Right. Yeah, and I think toxic positivity is just as harmful, right?
What else, when you think about your years in the classroom and or your teaching of teachers, to support their nervous system and co-regulate, what would you want to make sure people walk away from? What could be this episode or all of the conversations we've had with you so far, part 1 and part 2. What do you hope people walk away with? Remembering, practicing.
I hope I really like what Rachel Hack said about, it's not so much a mental health crisis, it's a relationship crisis. And that we don't need to rely on someone else to fix it. Now, I'm going to say this again. I'm not saying you don't need counseling or therapists. I think that's really important too for some people. But instead of outsourcing our wellness, there's a lot that we can do to educate ourselves about our nervous system, the vagus nerve, our brain. And then there are very effective research-based practices that we can implement so that we can become more regulated, thus leading to more co-regulation with people within our relationships, and kind of a do-it-yourself, in a way, mental wellness, that the answers aren't out there. Well, there are, and the answers are out there, and there are a lot of answers within ourselves. And there's a lot we can do to be the best version of who we are and how we show up in this world.
Yeah. I think one of the things I really enjoyed in chatting with you on your couch there over tea, you pointed out in some of my sharing how much I was observing myself, like
Yes.
in dysregulation. And I've been noticing that even more, as I go through worn grooves in my brain, right? Those neural pathways and repeat cycles and repeat patterns. I've been stepping outside of myself in different ways and observing. And I feel like in observing, there's more choice.
Yeah.
And you can integrate the things that are maybe outside of you. It just feels, I don't know, you can find what works for you versus and Mary and I've talked about this, like this is the hack to fix your nervous system, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no fixing.
You don't need to be fixed. You're absolutely good and great already. Right. I agree. And I think, we've talked about that. And I think that's where that education piece of it is so it's not like, oh, I'm a bad kid with emotional problems. It's like, oh, leaning more into curiosity. Oh, my frontal lobe needs some more practicing with making good choices. Yeah. Or, we've talked about where you become the watcher of what's happening. My big hope too is when we are educated and empowered, we don't wait until something's a 911 or a big problem, like, oh, you start to see the antecedents to flipping out or to becoming dysregulated, where it's like, oh, okay, I'm noticing my breath is really shallow right now. Oh, I need to do some strategies to become balanced again.
Or in the long term, autoimmune disorders that can come from being dysregulated for decades.
Exactly. And the inflammation that can occur if you are in chronic fight and flight. Yeah, there's so many, to me, trickle-down benefits from understanding your body. And with that comes the compassion and the gratitude for such a wise system.
The magic within us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Well, I have greatly enjoyed our time on the couch with you. I'm going to need a lot more conversations, so I'm crashing your tea times.
Perfect.
Well, I love that. I've got a big couch, and
yay.
I'd love to try you that couch too.
Yes, that would be fantastic. And maybe we can partner together in that retreat coming this winter.
Your name already got jotted down.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. I love it. It sounds like good stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for being with us.
We
will talk soon and keep co-regulating and connecting. Just so grateful for you, Mary, in my life.
All right. And you too, keep doing the good work.
Thank you so much for joining us on the Red Couch. We would love if you would head on over and subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. It helps us tremendously as we rebel against the status quo of disconnection. We need you. We appreciate you. You can also head on over to our website, redcouchrebels.com, to send us a note and explore your inner rebel with us on our online network. We'd love to see you there.